Okay.
Thank you for registering for this seminar. I'm Bob Toifuku of Pacific Law Institute. Because House Finance will start a briefing at 9 a.m., I will have Finance Chair Kyle Yamashita, together with Ways and Means member Senator Troy Hashimoto, lead off. But I first want to introduce the new House Speaker, Nadine Nakamura, to make some welcoming comments. Speaker Nakamura hails from Kauai, as many of you know, and has been a representative since 2010. She's the prior majority leader and now Speaker of the House. So congratulations, Madam Speaker. You're on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob and the Pacific Law Institute for inviting us here today. And it looks like you have the A team of Senator Hashimoto and our finance chair, Yamashita. We're excited about the 33rd legislative session that kicks off next week, Wednesday. We have 51 members in the House of Representatives. 43 are Democrats, 8 are Republicans. And this year we have 11 new members. 8 of them are Democrats and 3 Republicans. We are excited to kick off this process. There are a lot of critical issues confronting our state. And in the interim, we all have been working on different components of those issues. And I think looking over the agenda you have today, you're covering a lot of bases. You're hitting the legislative process itself, the state's financial situation, and key policies before the state, and some of the bills that go along with those policies. So I just want to encourage everyone to engage in our process. We can see from other countries that democracies are fragile, and the more we can engage and learn and be educated and participate, the stronger our democracy will be. And I think that will benefit all of the residents of the state of Hawaii. So thank you again for giving us this opportunity to share our perspectives with you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Before we start the budget economy segment, 2 housekeeping matters. Questions, write them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as time permits. Secondly, if you need to utilize captions, press the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then press request. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Kyle Yamashita and Senator Troy Hashimoto. Finance Chair Kyle Yamashita from Maui was first elected in 2004 and has served in the legislature for the past 20 years. And he has been involved with the Finance Committee for many, many years. Senator Troy Hashimoto is a member of the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate, and I want to thank him for stepping in for Chair Dela Cruz, who had to be out of state for a meeting. Senator Hashimoto was in the House in 2018 and was appointed to the Senate in 2023 and elected outright in 2024. So let's start with Finance Chair Yamashita. Representative, what is your outlook on the state budget for this session?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Bob, for having me on, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you, your group and everybody. I think what we're going to be focused on is trying to manage expectation. I think what we're going to be experiencing, right? We had since the Lehman Brothers downturn, we had prosperity, revenue constantly climbed for over a decade, but now we're probably and then we had the pandemic, and then the Feds gave us money, and then we had a spike, but that was, also caused inflation. But now I think we're going to go through a flat cycle. So, earlier this week, the Finance Committee had informational briefing with our economists, Dr. Tian and Dr. Bonham. And, the key word was uncertainty, right? While construction is still booming because of the infusion mainly by government, the federal government, Pearl Harbor, those kind of things, and also state government, the counties are putting in rail. There is construction is still fairly strong, but at the same time, Hawaii has higher than is high inflation. It's higher than the U.S. average. Visitor spending is less, and so that's a concern. And then we have what's happening at the national level, right? Immigration reform, tariffs, tax policy shifts. Those are unknowns for it at this point. So economies are usually cyclical. So my concern is that we're in the flat cycle right now. We haven't had a downturn. So part of what we have to do is be a little cautious and maybe prepare for something like that. So our budget reserves are very, very important. Um, we're asking the departments that are asking us for new funding that maybe they need to look within their budget first. As you may or may not know, in general, we have about a 30% vacancies throughout the entire state. Some are higher and some are lower. But right there are, and it's because our workforce age people population is shrinking because people, as we know, are leaving the state. So that's of concern. Um, we have the council revenue met on the 8th, and so I think one of the things that they brought up was the large infusions of money that came in, the $350 million from an estate settlement, and then also about $100 million in about interest income revenue that was primarily from all the money we got from the feds that we were holding in the treasury that created that. So again, these are one-time infusions. So managing expectation, although there's money there, it is money that will not recur. So we have to be careful how we proceed forward. Council revenue responsibly, I think, adjusted revenue growth from 6% to 5.6%, which in essence will reduce revenue by about $250 million for this next biennium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hashimoto, is the Senate's view on the budget basically similar to what the House Finance Chair's comments that they just made?
Yeah, well, good morning, Bob. Good to see you. Thanks for allowing us to be here and to talk to your group. I think Chair Yamashita always does well with the economics side of things, and I think he definitely hit it on the mark. I think we here in the Senate we are cautiously optimistic of what our budget projections will look like. I think similar to him, we are looking at a lot of what the tourism numbers are looking like. And I think when you take a look at the latest DBED economic development projections, I think tourism won't make a comeback until they think 2027. I think the spend is very good, but again, Japan international tourism lags pretty bad right now. When we take a look at things holistically, the Japanese visitors are still pretty weak. Canadian visitor market is still running about 25%. And so that international component really needs to come back for us to see a full recovery. And so if we don't have that full revenue picture, come back, then I think we're going to have to make sure that our expenses are in check. I think this Lahaina fire obviously did not help. Maui's still down 25% compared to 2019. And so we hope that will come back, especially for Kyle and myself. We hope that will come back sooner than later. I think one of the biggest challenges is when we talk about the expense side, right? We have the Lahaina settlement that we hope will come to fruition this coming year. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to make a ruling on some of the outstanding issues, but that will cost us around $800 million from the state side. And we won't have to do it one time; it'll be over a period of time. But still, with that $800 million is a one-time expense that we will have to budget for. We know from the federal side that at least Maui will be taken care of. There's going to be $1.6 billion in community development block grant funding that hopefully will then alleviate the state a little bit from us having to spend state dollars in the Maui recovery. So we're hoping those funds will come down fairly quickly. What's worrying us a little bit is that with the change of administration, how fast will that 1.6 billion be able to then trickle down, right? There's the ability for the new administration to slow that process. And in the meantime, the county may come to the state for assistance. And so we want to make sure that the county can properly spend all that and also other federal funds that are available for the rebuild that will happen. We also have collective bargaining coming up. We have multiple unions that we will have to figure out, and that is a known expense. But when you take a look at the private sector and their union negotiations, they were very contentious. And so we hope that our collective bargaining will go smoothly. We hope that it's something that we can afford into the future. But I think as Chair Yamashita was talking about, we have humongous vacancies, within state government. And so we really have to think deeply about how we look at collective bargaining negotiations, because our employees do need more pay. We do need to be more competitive so we can bring down that vacancy rate. Because at the end of the day, the state government is running less efficient because we have so many types of vacancies. In addition to that collective bargaining, we still also have hazard pay that we need to take care of. And so that's an outstanding expense that we still haven't fully paid out. That was from COVID times. I think we paid out a little for some collective bargaining units, but we haven't paid them out for all. So that's another expense. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of moving parts. I think revenue is okay this year, but all those things that I outlined, we do have to take care of. And so I think we agree with the House that we definitely need to be cautious moving forward.
Thank you very much, Senator. Chair Yamashita, last session, the legislature passed a historic cut to income taxes. And some are concerned about whether we can afford these cuts. Can you share with us your perspective on this?
Yes. So thank you, Bob. So when the legislature passed it last session, our budget, as well as the 6-year financial plan, did balance. And the council revenue did concur, and with their numbers, they do account for that. So I believe we are okay. But I think what everybody needs to understand is, everybody's looking at this as a historic tax cut, which it was. But at the same time, the reason why the legislature felt that this was very important is because what didn't happen over the years, as we raised minimum wage, we were supposed to adjust the brackets. Because we didn't do that, when we reached the top level in 2018, 2028, and it goes up to $18 an hour, right? If we didn't make that adjustment, people making minimum wage would be paying middle income taxes. So they'd be paying about 6.8%. Versus what we have done now, when we do hit that $18 amount, and there's going to be a tiering of adjusting the brackets, people making minimum wage will be paying only about 1.4%. So that's an adjustment that we needed to be, right? We want to help the people on the bottom and things like that. The other thing that we did was we made an adjustment to the standard deduction, right? So we wanted to get money into people's pockets right away. So the idea is that what we had, when we did the analysis of who was taking advantage of certain tax credits, such as the food credit and the child independent credit, and even the ITC to some degree, people that we were trying to help were not taking advantage of that. And people with the wherewithal to be able to hire CPAs were actually taking advantage of it more. And it wasn't really the people that, well, we're trying to help everybody, but it wasn't helping the people that we're trying to target. By increasing the standard deduction, doubling it first of all, and then raising it slowly until 2030, it will start to give money to people. Just give them the money, right? Let them keep the money instead of having them apply for these credits. So we believe that that's a better way to go.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is sort of a tangential question, not on specific budget issues per se, but we, keep hearing questions about bill referrals, and in particular, whether bills without any appropriation specifically need to go to the Finance Committee. So I'd like your thoughts on that. You've been with Finance for many years, and I think it would be constructive to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. Well, the Finance Committee has jurisdiction over expenses and revenue. So we have to look at everything concurrently and equally. We have to consider the impacts of the bills that may have economic impact. So we have to consider costs, resources that the bill may require. Um, there may be no appropriation in the bill, but it still may obligate the state in the future. For example, there may be statutory mandates that are in there that, there's no dollar amount, but the mandate would obligate the state in the future. Joining state compacts could do those things. So as we look at these bills, we have to consider all those things, and even through the process, right? As the bills go through committee, we are monitoring those bills very carefully, because if there is an amendment to the bill that obligates the state in the future, sometimes the finance committee or WAM will ask for a referral to come to them, because now there's some kind of impact, right? Either currently or into the future, or in some manner that may affect the economy. So finance has to look at it from all those perspectives, and that's kind of our responsibility. I think it is something that we take very seriously.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry that we don't have Chair Yamashita for more time, but he has the Finance Committee hearing starting in about 10 minutes. So before you leave for the briefing, do you have any other comments you want to make, Chair?
Yeah, so I think people were also commenting on that that we may be looking at the tax code going forward. I think that we still want to do comprehensive review of it. We have asked different people with letters after the name, PhDs, to kind of help us do an analysis of where we are today, and then collect the data, and then do an analysis of the data to figure out what would be the best path forward. So we're still in that process.
Thank you very much, Chair Yamashita. Thank you for taking the time this morning to discuss the economy, the budget, as well as some other issues. Have a fruitful hearing, and best of luck this session.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Bob.
you. Thank you. Senator Hashimoto, I'd like to now focus on your views and the Senate views on the economy and financial situation in Hawaii. And do you have any further comments on the Senate's view on the overall budget and the future economic issues, although you covered them fairly well in your initial statement?
Yeah, no, I think when we take a look at some of the priorities that we will be focusing on, I think, we need to make sure that there's room for the things that the state needs to move forward. And so I think with the revenue picture, we will have to, figure that out. I think, the revenue picture is where we start. And we know that there's a few things that we have to accomplish along the way, right? I think when you take a look at what are the big emerging issues this coming session, and you just turn on the TV and you see the California wildfires, and although it's apocalyptic on watching that, it reminds us all about Lahaina. I think like it really circles back to our looming problem that we have in Hawaii on this insurance issue, right? And I think a lot of people are calling their legislators and being very, very upset about the rising condo insurance costs, the home cost of homeowners insurance. And so we know that that's something that needs to be solved this coming session. I think we tried to do a few fixes with the governor's emergency proclamation. I think there was bills that went through last year. And so there's a lot of discussions happening on how we can bring relief in that end in terms of what will it take. And so those are the kind of expenditures that we will have to take a look at. We're going to have to prioritize it. We might have to reprogram some money when that to make that happen. I think the latest conversations are we most likely we'll have to set aside a fund for condo insurance or insurance in general to just calm the markets. We're not sure if it'll work because it's a private insurance market, and so what are the levers that need to be pulled to at least stabilize the rate or bring the rate down? Because part of the conversation right now is the private market it is in theory holding stable, but after this California fire, who knows what will happen after the discussions on the settlement. Depending on how the Supreme Court rules, who knows what will happen on rates moving forward. So we are watching that very, very closely. We know that that is something that needs to be addressed, but there's a whole slew of things that will be looked at, right? Because that's just one aspect. You ask every single committee chair, and yesterday we did release some of the priorities of the Senate that we are looking for, that we are hoping to do. But a lot of it, unfortunately, is some expansions of programs. A lot of it is new priorities. I think, we heard from the governor that he wants to implement some of his climate action teams initiatives that Chris Benjamin and chaired along with some very smart other people. They want to also create another fund to take care of resiliency projects across the state. So that's going to cost a little bit of money as well. They want to create the fire marshal's office. That I think will be top of mind again because of these California fires. And so, I think that's why we're really wondering. We have to start to prioritize to figure out what are the biggest things that need to happen. And I think really it's about making sure that our state will move forward, right? Because we need to make sure that what happened in California doesn't again happen to us. But that's, I think, top of mind right now. But then, of course, you ask us next week, and there's going to be another issues. I think if you asked us last week, I think the biggest issue was fireworks, right? In terms of how are we going to crack down on fireworks and how are we going to fund the Department of Law Enforcement to make that happen? So there, a lot of things we know need to happen.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, there was a comment and a question actually in the Q&A box. It says, Representative Hashimoto hit the button on the nose about expenditures. Hawaii is way behind competitive wages for county and state personnel. And there's no easy answer to this, but how can we support and advocate for our young people as potential recruits and keep them in the state civil service? So many are leaving for greener pastures on the continent. And like I said, there's no easy answer to this, but and it's a matter of revenue and where the money's going to be spent. But do you have any comment on that, Senator?
Yeah, so I think this is something that I've personally been working on very, very closely. And I think when you take a look, I think civil service pay is a big issue. We're going to have to figure that out. A lot of it is the collective bargaining process. I think we had the Department of Law Enforcement before WHAM. They were specifically talking about sheriffs. They actually want to do a supplemental agreement because the sheriffs are lagging behind police officers and they can't recruit sheriffs. And so they're trying to do a supplemental agreement with the sheriffs. The state is to give them a parity with the police officers. So I think the departments will have to think deeply about how they are going to recruit, how they're going to reprice, how are they going to redescribe positions, and that's not an easy feat. I think just to fill a position is very, very difficult in state government, and that's nothing new. We've been trying to figure that out for years now. But I think what the broader picture that when we take a look at affordability is when you take a look, especially Holomua came out with a new survey of cost of living. I think it's what people are consistently and have been saying, and we know already is what's pushing a lot of people out is housing, right? Housing is your biggest cost driver in that any family is paying for, whether it's through a mortgage or rent. And so if you can bring that housing cost down, then at least we have a shot. And so, I think we're looking at creative solutions in various pockets. One of the biggest projects that we need to see get off the ground is the teacher housing project in Mililani. There's tremendous community outcry over it, but I think we need to figure that out to make sure that we can start moving forward, because that is some of the benefits that we need to be giving to public employees to retain them and keep them here in Hawaii. So we need to figure that out. I'm hoping we can this coming session, but those are the kinds of examples of things that we're going to have to start to expand more of to keep our workforce here in Hawaii.
Thank you. I know that many legislators are also talking about the national situation and the national agenda. And so, what's your feeling on how the national agenda may impact the state finances and the budget? For example, if the president-elect imposes tariffs across the board, as he initially said he might or would do, what do you think would be the impact on our state and future revenues or the cost of living?
That's a really good question, Bob. And I think we have to take that in a couple parts. I think when you take a look specifically on the tariffs side, I think we should be very, very concerned, right? I was recently at a Hawaii Realtors Outlook for the upcoming year, and I think one of their speakers really brought up a very important point because they were talking specifically on construction costs. I think Chair Yamashita brought it up that construction costs are rising. It's impacting state government. It's impacting private projects that you're seeing. But guess where we get most of our lumber? We get most of our lumber from China. We get a lot of our lumber from Mexico. And guess who's going to see a lot of tariffs coming? It's China and Mexico. And so I think we likely will see an increase in the cost of materials. And we already thought that our cost of materials were really high, right? From coming out of the pandemic, material costs were skyrocketing. It was hard to even build, a single family home. And I think what I'm afraid is we don't want to go back into that area. So I think tariffs, we should be very, very concerned because the trickle down, especially on Hawaii, is going to be very impactful. Now, in terms of just the broader perspective of, what will happen policy wise, I think we'll have to kind of figure that out and we'll have to kind of wait and see because I think looking on the bright side, I don't know if they'll unilaterally cut off some of the funding. I think what might happen is some of the reprogramming of money to different areas. And the reason why I say that is because when you take a look at Republican leaning states, right, a lot of times they rely heavily on federal subsidies. Their states do not subsidize anything, for school, for they don't. There's no Medicaid expansion, for school meals. It's all the federal funds, right? And so if the federal funds get cut off in those specific areas, then those red states get nothing. And so the baseline I think likely will stay there because it's universal. It's things that everyone needs. What I think will happen though is the money will start to get reprogrammed. So I really monitor in the housing space what the federal government is doing. And so for one example is they'll likely move away from things like the low income housing tax credit. They'll probably stay capped or they won't expand it. But then they'll probably move housing money into areas for for sale, for the workforce area. So it's not going to take care of the lower income, but at least the money will still be there. It's just being reprogrammed. So we're going to have to watch that because it will have tremendous effects on the state budget in the meantime, because if programs go away, we will have to pick it up or it may disappear. And I think if we follow what California is doing, California has set aside some money for litigation. And I'm sure our state will likely do the same just in case there's policies that we don't like that the federal government is pushing.
Okay, thank you, Senator. A couple more questions before I know you have to leave as well. Any thoughts on future revenue for the state? I mean, there are all sorts of ideas that percolate, but you have any comments on that for potential future revenues?
So I think the governor has always wanted some type of green fee, and I think you'll be hearing from him at his State of the State. But I think just internally we know that the green fee is very, very difficult. I think probably what likely will happen is an adjustment in the transient accommodations tax because that's just the easiest thing for us to do. And so we will see if that is a proposal of the governor, but I think that is something that we likely will see in the near future. I know the visitor industry, it's a catch-22 because the visitor industry, as I said previously, it's not fully recovered. It's still soft. And when you take a look at surveys, DBED surveys on why people aren't returning to Hawaii is because it's just too expensive, right? And so adding more taxes into our visitor base when we want to see an uptick in our economy is a tough one to balance. But it is our cash cow. It is the biggest source of our economy. And so that's when we're looking for revenue, that's an area where we might have to naturally look. I think the other big thing that will continually be on the table that was fairly close last year, but not quite there, is the legalization of marijuana. I think that in theory we are getting more and more open. I think it got very close to passing out of the House. I think it was like 50-50 last year, but the House is a very, very different face of people this year. And so maybe there is some change in dynamics, but that in theory should bring us some revenue if we do decide to legalize that. And so I think that is something that we will really have to take a look at and think about. The Senate has obviously been okay with it, and we will see what our House counterparts will do. So I think everything and anything is always on the table at a new legislative session. I'm sure we'll have some bills relating to in the gambling space, whether it's just specifically for sports betting, whether it's for casinos. I think it happens every single year, but I think obviously over the past recent history, those haven't gone very far. But I think we're always thinking how we can bring more revenue and how can we make more fixes, because it is very important for a future revenue stream.
Thank you, Senator. Here's a process type question. Because Ways and Means has primarily decision-making hearings without verbal testimony, what is the best way for organizations or individuals to advocate for their position?
That's a really good question. And so, I think what everyone needs to remember, I actually sit on the referral committee for the Senate, and so I think we get to decide to where the bills go. And I think the most important referral a lot of times is that first referral, because they will be the lead committee, where it's, at least in the Senate, they'll spend a little bit more time on issues. They'll listen to you. They're tasked with really fixing the bill up before sending it to the back end committee, which likely will be WHAM. Sometimes there might be a joint hearing in the front or on the back end. But make sure that you spend that time with that first committee, because and if it gets to conference, that's the lead negotiator is that first committee. So just remember that. When it gets to WHAM, again, it is a little bit tricky because it's decision making only. And the reason for that is we believe that it's supposed to have been vetted in that first committee. And when it goes to WHAM, it's just the financial impact that we're looking at. Right. And so we know that a lot of times that's what holds up bills. But I think, being proactive is very important, making sure that if it's really important to you, I think it's communicating with members. I know a lot of people are outside of the Capitol. So sometimes it's a simple email to members to make sure that they know what your position is. Making sure that you submit testimony, because we do read the testimony. Although we don't take verbal testimony, there is still the ability for written testimony to be submitted. And so continually engage. And the most importantly is, if you have a fix or something that you do not like, make sure you write out what we need to take out of the bill, because then we don't have to personally figure out how do we fix a bill if you have concerns about it. And so that giving us that language is very, very helpful. But I think the whole game of the legislature is always be proactive, right? Over communicate, make sure that you try different ways to get your message across. And you got to put yourselves into our shoes and think, okay, how would I want to get that information? And I think that's always a good thing to kind of figure out the best way to communicate with us.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Last question. What about grants and aid, GIAs? Any estimate? I know it's hard to give an estimate, but any estimate about how much may be allocated for GIAs?
Yeah, I think in general, historically the baseline amount has been $30 million for grant and aids, $10 million for operating, $20 million for capital, longer term projects. And so I think the Senate position is we're hoping that it'll go higher, but I think at the end of the day, we will have to balance that out with all of the expenses that we just talked about previously that will be coming out. And then we will have to see what the financial picture is, because we have to remember there is going to be another Council on Revenues report. We hope that it either stays the same or maybe it goes up, so you get a little bit more money. But all of that will factor in, and we'll likely make that decision later in the session. But I am confident to say that the Senate is pushing for a higher amount.
Thank you. For those on the seminar, in the Senate, Senator Donovan Dela Cruz and Senator Sharon Moriwaki are the two legislators primarily responsible for the GIA from the Senate's perspective. And in the House, it is Nan Holt and Lisa Kitagawa. So those are the persons that you need to talk to specifically after you submit your application. And the deadline for the application is next week, Friday, the 17th. So don't forget that. Senator Hashimoto, thank you very much for spending your time to inform us on what to expect during the upcoming session. Good luck with this session, and I know that the Maui constituents appreciate your help over there. Thank you very
Bob.
much.
Appreciate it.
Okay, I now want to go through some of the basic information and mention the changes made for the upcoming session. But first, let me introduce the two legislators for the next segment on policy issues. So Senator Rhodes and Representative Ichiyama can join us at this point. Senator Carl Rhodes is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and has been in the legislature for the past 18 years, first as a representative and then as a senator since 2016. Representative Linda Ichiyama is the current vice speaker in the House and has been a representative since 2010. During the past session, she was the chair of the Water and Land Committee. Now, I just want to take a few minutes before they start going into some policy issues, basic information for those on the seminar. Keep in mind, there's a tremendous amount of information on the legislative website, and it is www.capitol.hawaii.gov. And it will give you much of the basic information, schedule, timetable, important deadlines on the calendar, committee structure, phone numbers and email addresses for all senators and representatives. And also, you should check the public access room segment because they have lists of office managers, clerks, etc. So that's an important aspect. You need to study the website and become familiar with it. You know, the basic procedures in 2024 will be followed during the 2025 session. You still have to show your ID to enter the Capitol. And now I want to just take a couple minutes to mention the following. New Senate members and committees. Senator Samantha DeCourt won her race in the 22nd District and is the third Republican to join the 2025 Senate. There is one new committee, Energy and Intergovernmental Affairs, and Senator Glenn Wakai is the chair. All other committees are basically the same in the Senate as it was in 2024, except for Public Safety with Senator Brandon Elefanti as the chair. Now, the major changes happen in the House. I think you heard Speaker Nakamura say that there are 11 new members in the 2025 session, and together with approximate 18 new members in 2022, you now have 29 members out of 51 House members that have 2 years or less experience in the legislature. Also, I think you all know that leadership has changed. Speaker Nakamura is speaker, Nadine Nakamura is speaker. Representative Ichiyama is the vice speaker, and Representative Sean Quinlan is the majority leader. House committees, this is where there have been significant changes. And I recommend that you check the committee lists and the committees that you deal with and review the new membership on these committees. For example, the A bracket committees, Consumer Protection and Commerce has a new chair, Representative Scott Marayoshi, and 8 of the 10 members are new. Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs has the same chair as last year, Representative David Tarnas, but now has 8 new members out of 11 and a new vice chair, Representative Poi Poi. Likewise, Finance has the same chair, and you've heard from Representative Yamashita, but a new vice chair, Representative Jenna Takaneuchi, and 9 out of the 16 members on finance are new. Tourism has 6 out of 7 new members and a new chair, and education will have 8 out of 11 new members, and higher ed will have 7 new members out of 11. So you need to take a look at these committees because it's different from 2024. So let me ask Representative Ichiyama about, as Vice Speaker, any comments on the new lineup in the House?
Thank you very much, Bob, for having me. I think you summed it up pretty well. We're going to see a lot of new faces in our committee rooms and on the floor, and that's very exciting. I would say, just maybe adding on to your question, for folks who are used to interacting with the legislature on a regular basis, this might be a really good opportunity to help educate our new members. And I'm sure you may want to also be prepared to go back to fundamentals and basics and try to really bring everybody up to speed.
I guess, Senator Rose, not much change in the Senate with regard to leadership, committee chairs. Any comments from your end?
Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me on. No, I mean, it's designed that way. The Senate is not supposed to turn over as fast. It's supposed to be, and we have longer terms in most years. Only roughly half of us are up each time, and so typically we don't have major changes like the House had this year. And we're supposed to be more deliberative, whatever that means. So yeah, it hasn't changed much, and that's by the constitutional plan.
Okay, now let's go into the meat, so to speak, of this segment. And I think that people would, in the audience, want to know what major policy issues will be focused on by the House and Senate. So maybe I'll start with Representative Ichiyama, and what are some of the major policy issues that the House will undertake?
This year, we are really focusing on cost of living. We heard very loud and clear from our members that that is the number one issue facing their communities across the state. And I think that the recent Alice report released yesterday by Aloha United Way and the Bank of Hawaii Foundation really just reaffirms that. When you look at their data, although the number of Alice families decreased, they really attributed that to more families leaving Hawaii versus conditions getting better. And so it's very sombering data. I think they reported that 1 in 3 families had a family member that was thinking about leaving Hawaii. And the number one reason that was cited was cost of living. And a large part of that, as we know, is the cost of housing. So we'll be looking very closely this year at how those issues interrelate. And we'll be continuing to work on making sure that all of our residents are able to afford to continue to live here.
Senator, I think that the Senate's probably interested as well in the housing and cost of living issues. Any comments from your end from the Senate's perspective?
No, I think we're in concurrence on that. Housing, of course, has been an issue for a long time, and for most households, that's their biggest cost item. And that's been everybody on the call probably is aware that we've been talking about this for 25 years. I think we're to the point where we're going to have to start trying things that would not have been seriously considered 15 years ago. I noticed the other day that the Canadians have put a moratorium on purchase of residential houses for foreigners, and that's a pretty dramatic step that other countries that are in similar situations to us, like New Zealand, where you get a lot of tourists and people want to be there because it's such a nice place. Things like we unfortunately as a state we're not allowed to do that, but there are things that are equally dramatic, I would say, that could be done. Some of them from the county level, like there's been a lot of discussion about an empty house tax. Well, I don't even know if it has to be an empty house, but a house that's not being used as a primary residence, I think we have to start seriously considering taxing it at a higher rate. We already do that for investors. As a, if you're renting a unit out, you pay substantially more in property taxes, but we may be to the point where we have to do something more draconian to try to get costs under control, because we've been fighting this issue a long time. There is a lot of money in the rental housing trust fund, and I'm not quite sure what's the rental housing trust fund, dwelling unit revolving fund, but we've over the last 6 or 7 years have been pouring money into that to try to help on the supply side, and it does help, but it's such a big problem that and it takes a long time to get houses built. So yeah, I think housing will continue to be a very important issue from this side of the Capitol.
Representative Ichiyama, we did talk when we were preparing for the seminar that wages is also a concern for the House. Do you want to make any comment on that, as well as potentially, there's so many issues, childcare costs, but I know they're all part of the cost of living issue that the House is going to be looking at.
Oh, absolutely. So our overall theme is addressing cost of living, and I think we're looking at certain issue areas that attribute to that, or including housing is the primary one, but childcare, as you mentioned, is another. We would like to continue the work that the legislature started, and the lieutenant governor has taken the lead on in expanding access to early learning, our public preschool classrooms. We're also trying to look at ways that we can help create better opportunities for economic development. And one of the discussions that we're having is, how do we create more pathways for local kids to have internships and get experience and become that next workforce that we so badly need. So if we can help them get a head start, get some early training and hands-on experience in careers that they're interested in. And we're mainly focused on areas that are hard to fill, like healthcare. So we're having those discussions around what we can do under our economy, under housing, as well as infrastructure, and also addressing certain parts of our economy relating to biosecurity. I think we are having a lot of discussion about how invasive species affects our economy and affects our community as well.
I assume, Representative, that there will be legislation that will be introduced, addressing many of these issues.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Senator, similarly, you've already talked about the cost of living and housing, and I know that you're a strong supporter of climate change, and whether it's funding or any kind of legislation that may be involved. And I know that we've discussed that before about the rising oceans and now looking at what's happening in California with the hurricane type winds and the fire. I appreciate your comment on your views on climate change and whether the Senate or the legislature will be undertaking that and doing anything on that.
Well, thanks for that question. Unfortunately, all the news on climate change is bad, and a lot of it is quite inflationary too. We look at the Lahaina fire as this uniquely awful situation, but unfortunately, just because something is awful doesn't make it unique. And there's the fires in California reinforce that. They're going through kind of the very similar situation that we've just gone through in Lahaina. Fortunately, I don't think the casualties have been as high, but this is not a one-off thing. There's going to be either another fire or all the stuff that the climatologists have predicted 20 years ago are coming true. Sea level is rising. The atmospheric temperature is going up. In fact, for the first time this year in 2025, we're expected to actually go over the 1.5 Celsius threshold that scientists thought would be something that we could absorb and still live basically the same lives that we live. There has been 12 months in the last 14 months where there was a year where we're over 1.5 Celsius. So unfortunately, these are all, we're seeing I was hoping that I was old enough that that it would always be this problem looming over the horizon that wouldn't quite get to me, but it's here. And the insurance issues that we're having are largely driven by climate change. The old algorithms don't work. There's a lot of uncertainty with the insurance companies. They don't know how much they don't know what they're going to need to cover the next disaster, but they're pretty convinced at this point that there will be a next disaster. So, what to do about that? I mean, the most effective thing to do would be to pass a carbon tax. I will continue to advocate for that. The reason the carbon tax is important is because it's literally microeconomics 101. If you raise the price of something, less of it will be purchased. And in this case, the thing that you're trying to keep people from purchasing is carbon. The beauty of the carbon tax is even if you give the money back, the same amount of money back to the people who are paying it, so you can protect the lower income, they'll take the tax refund, thank you very much, but they'll still try to avoid buying stuff that has a lot of carbon in it because the price is higher. So that combined with a lot of other policies that we've already implemented, we're actually quite well ahead of the curve compared to most places, because I think in Hawaii we're much sort of viscerally aware of what the problems are going to be. I mean, if you look at Waikiki, it's only like 3 feet above sea level right now, and that's one of the big economic drivers of our state. So I think in Hawaii we're more attuned to that than a lot of places.
Yeah, and I know there was a report that just came out by the climate change group. And like you, I think, Senator, many years ago, I thought, well, climate change is a ways away, but it's already here. And I thought, well, maybe I won't be living to see the devastating effects of climate change and ocean rise, but it's already here. And when you look at the North Shore as well as other areas, so I think people are hoping the legislature takes a look at it and tries to remedy the situation. There are some other questions, but that I want to ask. But there's some questions that are coming up in the Q&A box, and let me ask both of you. This is the question: how can the legislators can find a solution to address small business from shutting down due to the rising costs, such as government regulation?
Well,
I mean,
Rep, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
I have to say I personally experienced this. I have 2 young children, and they like to go to that indoor playground at Ward, the Kids City. And so afterwards, we usually go to the Genki Sushi that's in that same building. And we walked over there, and it was closed. And I think the situation Kakako is unique because there is a lot of changes and a lot of redevelopment going on in that area. But I am hearing stories and concerns of many businesses like that are closing. And, the decision to close a business, I'm sure, is always a difficult one for the owner, and one that has to, right, be based on whether or not they can make it work and whether or not they can pencil it out financially. I think from a state perspective, what we're trying to look at is how do we support businesses and create an environment where they have the things that they need to be successful. Infrastructure is one, making sure that they can afford utilities, electricity, water, and be able to grow. The other is workforce development. Can they hire enough employees? Are they getting good employees? Can they retain them? And then last part, I think, is that question about regulation. What are we doing at the state government that might be getting in the way or slowing down the private sector? And when we see examples of that, it's important for us to hear about it so that we can address it.
Thank you. Senator, any comment?
Well, I grew up in a small business, not here in Hawaii. My father owned an electronics store when I was young, and I worked there for years. And the problem with regulation is that some regulation is needed. If you look back over the history of business and industry in the United States and all over the world, if you just let corporate America do whatever they want, including small business, they will do things sometimes that are not beneficial to consumers, that are that's the word I'm looking for, where the necessity of making enough money to survive overcomes their basic humanity of trying to protect their customers. So for me, the trick with regulation is you just have to as little as you can get away with is what you need to do, which means reviewing it routinely. So the Small Business Regulatory, forgetting the technical name for it, but they do look at especially new regulation and see whether it's something that makes sense, that's really necessary. There are also opportunities to look at older regulations and say, do we really still need to do this? Because sometimes technology changes and you don't need to anymore. The other thing I would emphasize is that the flip side of regulation is that you also, as a business, we were lucky in Bloomington, Indiana, where I grew up, that we didn't have every 10 time that we came into our store, we didn't have to shovel human feces out of our front doorstep. Well, that's not the case in Chinatown. All too many businesses have to deal with that every morning. And that's why one of the emphases that I and others in the legislature have had for years is trying to get a handle on treatment for the mentally ill, because primarily that's who it is. So ideally, it's a partnership where the regulation is as minimal as possible, where the government actually does things that need to be done so that the private sector doesn't have to worry about things like mentally ill people sleeping in their front doors.
Okay, thank you, Senator. There was a question, although Senator Hashimoto touched on it, there was a question, and maybe you want to comment or you have feelings on it. The concern was whether federal appropriations will be cut to the state under the new national administration. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it's a guess as to what's going to happen, but if the amount of federal appropriation gets reduced, then it's going to have a negative impact on us.
If you're okay, Vice Speaker, I'll go first on this one. Okay. I think it's just really difficult to tell there's a real high level of uncertainty, and I think you see that in I think Senator Hashimoto mentioned that with regard to the Council on Revenue's predictions. We just don't know. And soon to be president again, Donald Trump makes a lot of promises, some of which he keeps and some of which he doesn't. And I don't know the algorithm to figuring out which ones he's going to keep and which ones he doesn't. He also tends to be quite vindictive. I mean, there was an incident when he was president the first time where he didn't want to send federal disaster relief to California because it's California and it's a very democratic state. And his advisors had to point out to him that there were more Republicans in California than there are in any other state in the union, and that that even if you look at it through that partisan lens, you still need to take care of the people of California. But he has an impulse to punish people, and so I worry a little bit because Hawaii has been, all 3 times he's run, we've given him very low percentages of the vote. I mean, he's done progressively better, but it's still, 30% isn't very good in a presidential race. So I think the real answer is we just don't know.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think if anybody had a crystal ball, that's really the question on what this next federal administration will look like and what those impacts will be on Hawaii. But I know our congressional delegation continues to monitor it closely, and we're very fortunate to have them advocating for us in DC in Congress.
Let me ask another question, and then I have another issue that I'd like both of you to address. Somebody wrote in that we're not hearing too much about the urgency of other, quote, cash cows, IT, cybersecurity, disaster-related issues. And I know that Representative Ichiyama and I talked about the disaster situation and basically wildfires. And Rep, did you want to comment on that? Whether the House will be taking a look at any legislation or workshops or whatever on disaster-related issues?
Sure. I'm not sure I understand quite the question of whether or not disasters are a cash cow, but I think that the House definitely will continue to look at disaster preparedness and across all types of disasters, whether that's hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, lava. And reemphasized the need for both individual preparedness as well as community level preparedness. And when we had the Maui wildfires, at the time Speaker Psyche convened 6 working groups to address wildfires, and the wildfire preparedness working group was one that I led. And so we're going to continue to revisit our recommendations, including the one to reestablish the position of the state fire marshal. We created that position as a recommendation of the working group, and I think now that State Fire Marshal's office is being proposed to be expanded in several different ways. And so we're going to continue that discussion and look at what responsibilities that office should have and also what resources they might need.
Oh, thank you. I guess when the person asked about cash cows, I think that's my interpretation. They were, I think, wondering whether there was going to be appropriations made, in this tight budget cycle for disaster preparedness and whatever. I think that's what they were referring to. Same thing with if there's a cybersecurity and IT, whether there's going to be any appropriations made to help remedy or correct or deal with that situation. And I think both of you know, I think all legislators know, there are tons of issues where money is needed. And, that's where it's hard. That's the hard decisions that you all have to make. But anyway, okay. The question that I want to ask, and there's some other questions that we can get to before we close out this morning, but because of the recent tragedy with fireworks, and there have been a lot of articles written about whether anything's going to be done on fireworks, and so any of you. Carl, you can go first, or your comments on fireworks.
Thanks. I think a lot has been done. The joint task force that was put together a couple of years ago that the legislature funded, I think it was, I want to say it was Senator Dela Cruz's initiative, but we all supported it. But they've confiscated in the last about 3 years 227,000 pounds of illegal fireworks, and that's not nothing. I mean, you can tell, it just goes to show how many tons of fireworks are coming in, that amount of fireworks. You still had the display we had on New Year's Eve, but my understanding is the price actually did go up for illegal fireworks because so many were confiscated. So the Department of Law Enforcement has a plan that they want to put together. They have put together and are looking for funding for. And I think the chances of us passing big chunks of it anyway, or big parts of that plan, are very good, because it's one thing well, I mean, 5 people dead overnight, and that's not acceptable.
What was the recent article too about them finding that a lot of the illegal fireworks are being transported in passenger airplanes. And, I don't know how that happens, but that's kind of scary too. But Rep. Chiyama, any comments on the fireworks from the House's perspective?
Well, I would just share that I live very close to Keaka Drive, and what happened there was an absolute tragedy. I remember waking up on New Year's Eve because I tried to go to sleep, but I woke up because my house was shaking, because the fireworks that were coming from all sides around our house were just so loud and so uh, uh, frequent. And I think that there needs to be a level of individual responsibility here. As Senator Rhodes correctly mentioned, aerial fireworks are already illegal. And I think there maybe needs to be some tough discussions in families about, right, are we going to continue to do this, and is it worth the risk? And I hope that we never have another New Year's Eve like the one that we had this past year, and that people will be able to enjoy New Year's Eve responsibly and safely. I also am looking at the request from the Department of Law Enforcement on their fireworks unit. They're also asking for more testing equipment. because when they confiscate those, hundreds of thousands of pounds, like Senator Rhodes mentioned, they have to test it to make sure that it is illegal fireworks, that it meets the definitions in the statute, and it meets the required weight for it to be either a misdemeanor or a Class C felony. And unfortunately, right now, they don't have sufficient laboratory equipment in order to do all of that testing and the time it needs to in order for a case to be prosecuted. So that's one of the bottlenecks that we're trying to help so we can have more prosecutions and more enforcement.
Thank you for that. There was a question, and then I had a question too. And the last time I checked just recently, I don't think the House and Senate rules the new House and Senate rules have been effectuated yet. Is that correct?
We
I think
can't do
they're-
it until we convene
Yeah.
in session.
Yeah. So I guess the question is about reforms that being talked about. Any comments on that? I guess from the Judge Foley's committee a couple years ago recommended different things. Some of it was done. Others had hearings, but not necessarily passed. And whether any other changes might be made this year.
Would you like to go first, Vice Speaker?
Go ahead, Senator.
Okay. Well, yeah, we have passed. I mean, there's significant reforms were made in the wake of the scandals with former Senator English and former Representative Cullen. Some of them they sound fairly subtle, but I think are pretty major cultural changes. One of them that I talk about a lot is we banned fundraisers during session. And that, when I came in 18 years ago, even up to a few years ago, the last couple of weeks of session, there were lots of fundraisers, and it's sort of in some ways it was enjoyable because you get to go and hang out with your friends, and that was great. But it was sort of the definition of the old boys network, and that's gone. It's just the end of session is just different than it used to be, and while we are still allowed to raise money during session, it's much more difficult to raise money when you don't have a sort of focusing event where you can, send out invitations and ask people to show up. So that's been a big change. The other one, of course, affects lobbyists, and that's lobbyists are no longer allowed to make contributions to make contributions to anyone during the legislative session in 5 days before and 5 days after. And that's another pretty major change that not every state has, and I think that's an important one too. Having said all that, I've always been a supporter of publicly financed campaigns, and I think there's still probably a decent chance that improving our current partial public financing system will happen. I don't think, unfortunately, that I'll get what I wanted, which was a full-on comprehensive financing, because to run a competitive campaign, even at the level that, at the Senate House, State House level, you need money, and you have to get it somewhere. And if you get it from private sector actors, then you have to keep two sets of people happy. You have to keep your constituents happy, the people who actually vote for you, and you have to keep enough donors happy that you can fund your elections. And that's just sort of a built-in conflict of interest. So I would prefer to go a different route, but I think realistically, the best we're going to do this year would be beefing up the current partial system.
Representative, any comments? I have a comment too about some of the reforms too.
Sure. No, I agree with Senator Rhodes that many of, if not the majority of the recommendations for the Foley Commission have actually been implemented. And whether that was changes to our rules internally or by adopting new statutes, I think that was a very thoughtful and well done report, and we listened. We took all of those suggestions, and I think that there is still more work to be done, absolutely. And so the House currently is in our process of revising our House rules. And we have a very inclusive process this year. I think our Speaker Nakamura really is genuinely interested in improving our House and how we operate and making it better. So I'm hopeful that working with all of our colleagues that we can get there.
I just wanted to make it's a personal comment. I sat in on a hearing in House Judiciary with Chair Tarnas, who's the chair of House Judiciary, and the issue of public financing came up. And I'm not against public financing. The problem that I think, and maybe I'm wrong, that a lot of the public don't understand is that even if you have public financing, because of the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United, people can still get money from the outside. Even though certain, you can put certain restrictions, but that's a real problem to me. So that even if you're going to say, well, $30,000 for a house race, somebody that has connections can still get money from the outside. You can't prevent that.
Yeah, that's correct. It's just that the way the system works now is the private donors, they'll look at a race where usually an incumbent is involved and say, well, the person who's challenging has no chance, so I'm not going to waste my money on that race. So you don't even have competitive races, which from an incumbent's perspective, that's great. I'd like to just not have a race at all. That would be great. But for democracy, small d democracy, I think you need to have a funding source that's independent from private donors so that you can at least be competitive.
Well, I think Bob also brings up a valid point about independent expenditures and dark money, super PACs.
Yeah.
Those are all issues that we absolutely need to address and continue to work on.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not a level playing field, no matter what you do, just about, But anyway, just a couple last minute questions. Rep Ichiyama, is there, on referrals, I think that Chair Yamashita addressed that about referrals, why there are certain referrals to finance. Any other issues that you want to deal with referrals? And the other question I have is that can you explain why many bills have a defective effective date, which kind of forces it into conference?
Sure. So I'll address your first question about bill referrals. From a practical perspective, bill referrals are driven by the committee jurisdiction descriptions that are contained in our House rules. And so that's really what our leadership uses to decide which bill goes where. And sometimes there's overlapping jurisdictions, and so we try to work it out between the chairs. But Chair Yamashita, just to reemphasize his point, is that I think a lot of people don't understand is that just because a bill doesn't have a dollar sign in it, there are still financial impacts, and that could be on revenue or future obligations of the state. So I think that's really important to understand. They're not an expenditures committee. They are the entire financial picture of the state, and they have to take that all into consideration. To your second question about defective dates, I often hear that from folks who are new to the legislature, like, what? You want to make this effective in 2030? That doesn't make any sense. 2050? And so it really is just a tool. And I think it's important. And we're reminding our committee chairs to explain that when they do decision making, that a defective effective date is not because we want the bill to take effect in 30 years from now. Really, it's just meant as a tool to let us know that it's still a work in progress. It could also be a bill with an appropriation in it. And so we need to revisit a dollar amount, or we need to work it out in conference. But the defective effective date just means that we need to continue to work on it. And ultimately, it's up to the chair to decide if a bill is ready and can move forward or not.
Senator, any comment on any potential changes in the process and procedures in the Senate? Doesn't seem like it anyway, but
I don't think much is going to change. I would say that historically, though, the Senate has tended to not refer quite as many things to Ways and Means as the House does to Finance. Because, I agree with Chair Yamashita that things that don't necessarily have an appropriation in them have financial impacts. The question is how much financial impact. So I think that the Senate has tended to be more sort of a de minimis rule, like if it's going to only be $50,000 or something, you know, when you're talking about billions of dollars in the budget. Don't worry about it. Well, if Ways and Means doesn't like it for some reason, they can let us know. Defective dates, yeah. I mean, the way. So when, as a committee chair, which I've been for quite a while now, your choice when you hear a bill is you have two choices. You can either try to pass it forward, and if your committee, the rest of your committee, or enough of the rest of your committee agrees, it goes forward, or you can kill it. And so defective dates are often, or I often use them as, okay, this is potentially a good idea, or this is a good idea, but we don't have all the bugs worked out. And if we pass it just like it is right now, it probably isn't going to work. So put a defective date on it, move it forward, try to work it out between whenever you're, you know, if you're looking at it in February, try to work it out by the beginning of May. And if we can't, then it dies in conference. If we can, then great, we got a bill.
Yeah. You know, from my experience too, there are many times at the substantive committee level, it's not fully vetted. And so they want to make sure that it just doesn't go through, cross over to the other chamber and create a bigger problem. So by putting, I know why the committee does that and ensure the defective effective date, to make sure that the final product is properly vetted and drafted, you know. But any other final comments, on Senator or Representative?
Just say thank you, Bob, for this opportunity. It's been a really good dialogue, and appreciate you making this available for us.
Good.
Ditto. Thanks for inviting me. And that was it's always a pleasure to discuss the issues of the day. Mahalo.
Well, thank you both, and to the other legislators who participated, Chair Yamashita and Senator Hashimoto, and of course the new speaker, Nadine Nakamura. We'll probably be showing a videotape of this on YouTube for people that want to look at it at some future time. And there's going to be a quick pop-up poll, and I'd appreciate it if those on the that are logged in can fill that out for future seminars that Pacific Law would like to do. But thanks again, and have a good day and a good weekend. And for those of you that are going to be involved in the session, good luck and have a good session. Thank you very much.